Yeah, it's a very modern, cynical viewpoint, which is the world that we live in a post-World War II world where we see the horrors of humanity, and we don't have there isn't the mass belief in a God that offers salvation as was present in previous generations. And so there's a lot of cynicism nowadays, and people that viewpoint that is being expressed by Noah is so common to hear nowadays for me that I'm not surprised that it is in there at all. But again, the whole point of the gospel is that yes, the whole point of the gospel is that there is what Noah is saying, and so it's yes, and yes, humanity is depraved, and God is still loving and merciful, and He offers salvation through the blood of Jesus Christ, who died for your sins on a cross, so that He could take the penalty for that, and so that you could, by putting your faith and accepting Him as your Lord and Savior, you can be offered redemption and forgiveness from your sins, and then be brought into the fold in the family of God, and preserved from the coming judgment and wrath of God that is going to be poured out upon the rest of humanity in the entire world.
Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World! I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
This one, I have 2 pages of notes on, but I don't think it's actually going to be that long. I just think I'm going to end up reading a lot of them word for word.
Yeah, and just one thing, I don't know how or where, but I've seen this little short before that's about the Noah thing, and I'll send it to you. It's just a little funny, kind of a GIF type of idea. I can get the internet to load. So, have you seen it? It's called like the Ramstein tale. It uses the Noah thing. It should have it.
Ramstein tale.
Sie wird heute Nacht nicht untergehen und die Welt zählt laut bis 10.
It's cool. It's not biblical.
I know.
The fire sword is a cool effect, but it's.
I just love the thing because I just love the thing. It's like somebody's like, let me just take like a German metal band and just import that into this scene, and it just makes it 100% better.
I like that. Yeah, I'll throw a clip of that in. So let's start there with the rock giant fallen angel, Nephilim. Not quite Nephilim.
The Watchers.
There's a lot that is unbiblical. The Watchers, but not like the Marvel Watchers. Gosh. What do you even... Okay, I have a couple things written down, the things they got right and things they got wrong. We'll get to those later.
Well, a lot of it is apocryphal. That's what it is.
Sure. I don't even know if it's apocryphal. Maybe you would know more about that.
Yes,
never read
because
the Apocrypha.
So I haven't done too much into it, but there's I'm like 85% sure this is accurate, but there is something called the Book of Enoch, which is kind of like an extra Genesis. Essentially, it's not canonical, but it is apocryphal. So that is basically for the uneducated listener. I'm playing up my little snobbery here, but there's the canonical Bibles, which is like the Gospels, the Old Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, all that sort of stuff. That's canonical that Christians accept as being the inspired Word of God. Then there's things called there's the Apocrypha, which are not canonical. They're not believed to be divinely inspired, but they are believed to have some good stuff. There is something there that is of worth, of interest that you can study. A lot of them came out around the same time as some of the things from the Bible itself were being written. So they're not held to the same standard. You don't like believe it 100% all that's it said, but it is something to consider and think a bit more. And there's also the pseudepigrapha, which is completely false and it's totally disregarded, but that's something else. So, but what they're kind of drawing on for the Noah story is, I'm pretty sure, is the Book of Enoch, which talks about these angelic beings called the Watchers, and who are the ones who essentially they watched over humanity, and they actually intervened into the state of affairs to try to help humanity. And that's kind of where they got the whole rock monster thing. I don't really think that the Book of Enoch actually talks about rock monsters specifically. That's more of a creative interpretation. But the idea of the Watchers is there's something there in some ancient texts. And that's kind of like the entire thing for the movie as a whole. It's like you can like there's some interesting inspirations. You can see what they're drawing on, but there's also a lot of interesting creative liberties taken, especially like the whole post-apocalyptic feel that they kind of went for.
The thing I was gonna say that I couldn't stop thinking of whenever I would see a Watcher on screen.
And having watched that movie, I can see where you're getting that from.
But only because it's Rock Monster. That's the only reason that I connect the two. It's also funny that they're both biblically based, but
I mean, yeah, it's really what it is. It's just Rock Monster.
I don't know why they decided to include that unless it was for the plot, because they ended up fighting the bad guys at the end and they had to be a formidable force. It was weird to have them earn their way back into heaven, basically. Because it also didn't seem like they were fallen angels. Like you started watching their story right at the beginning, and it sounded like it was going to be the Nephilim, the offspring of the fallen angels from who followed Satan, and ended up making humans on Earth. But the story was just that they were cast out of heaven, and they could earn their way back if they did enough good things, I guess. And so at the end of the battle, they started getting sucked back into the skies in their beautiful light form. So much of this movie is a fever dream, especially when you know the original story. And there's nothing. There is my main point for this whole movie, or for this whole episode. How do you fill a historical account with historical fiction while maintaining the accuracy and respect? You could say, and I believe that Darren Aronofsky said this.
There's actually nothing in the film that contradicts the Bible. What we did is because it's only 4 chapters long, we were incredibly truthful to every single word that's in there and tried to breathe life into it and to bring it to life for 21st century audiences.
And that's not true. But if that was his mindset going into it, he saw the core essence of the story that he then filled in the gaps. And some people have said that that is not okay when it comes to things like The Chosen. Some people have a gripe with that. Others, I believe some of those same people will go to, say, the Ark Encounter and be like, oh, this is so cool because they give Noah's wife a name, and just for consistency's sake. And I think that's something that you can compare is the Ark Encounter and Answers in Genesis and what they have done. And actually, I have a book that is called Noah. There's a trilogy of books that Answers in Genesis produced that is historical fiction and tells the story of Noah, of what it could be. Again, they're not saying it's biblical or saying that it's scripture, but it's based off of the Bible. And then they went ahead and used these books as inspiration for making the museum exhibits. That's the word I was looking for.
I think we should also clarify for all the Darwinists in the chat that we are young Earth creationists, just to clarify. So feel free to leave at this point. There goes our audience. No. Well, because kind of what you're getting to is like the difficulty of trying to adapt something that is historical, or at least believed to be historical. Some people would say this is more of a mythological adaptation, but there's something similar. And I think we've talked about this before on like adapting media. And as someone who likes history, I often have a lot of gripes with people who try to adapt history and make historical movies. Like the whole Napoleon debacle is the most recent example of that. And it always gets to the question of like, what do you adapt? What do you show? And then what about the things like there's a lot of stuff we just don't know. Like, so what do we do with that when here's what we do know and here's what we don't know, and how do you kind of fill in that space? Because like the story of Noah is like it's a story, but it's I can see where there's a lot of difficulty trying to adapt it onto the main stage for a movie where you had to sit for like an hour or whatever. And I'll say this much: I think they had some really interesting choices, and I didn't have a whole lot of gripes with the film as in regards to adapting the Bible story. Like they got the main beats there, although there was some really strange liberties taken especially near the end that I'm sure we're going to discuss. So I was just, but I think what this film does show, it's a very good way to try to, I think it's a very good tool for trying to examine how a secular society or a secular media tries to adapt a biblical story, or kind of how secular people understand the Bible. I think that's a really good way to understand how Hollywood or the movie industry might understand the Bible through studying this film, kind of as a Rorschach test in that sort of sense. Also, like, I was surprised at what an all-star cast there was. Like, seriously, like Anthony Hopkins. You have I'm blanking on all the names. The person who plays Hermione Granger, and
Russell Crowe is Noah, quite obviously.
Yeah, yep. Russell Crowe.
I didn't recognize any of the boys' names.
I recognized the faces.
I think Ray Winstone. Oh, Jennifer Connelly.
There you go. Yes,
Jennifer Connelly.
She's a pretty well-known actor. Like, it's all throughout the film, like, wait a minute, you're in this? Like, seriously? Like, I mean, it is a high-budget film. I'll say that much about it. I'm generally just like, it's crazy to me that this isn't that there's so many well-known people who were brought into this film for its production, which doesn't necessarily make it better or worse. But
it did flop, though. It was $125 million to make, and then you double that for advertising usually. And that's what you have to make. Like, movies have to make back twice their budget, their listed budget. And they only made $95 million worldwide. And that was kind of the era when a lot of Christians would boycott any movie that was unbiblical and not go. And I think that's an interesting line to draw, because there are some that are not good to see. And maybe for the young believer, it's not okay to see. When you're older in your faith and you have more discernment, I would encourage watching movies like this to see, like, where did they go wrong in every little bit, and just compare it to the Bible. And it's probably not something you would show your kids, because you don't want them to be like, that was Noah. And that's not right.
I mean, I think, and I kind of just feel like it's more of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it was. Darren Aronofsky said that he wanted to reinvent the biblical epic. And I thought, when I heard him say that in an interview, I said, but does it need that? Does it need to be reinvented? I think that Sight and Sound, I saw Sight and Sound do Noah as a show, as a live show, and it was compelling and interesting. And they actually had real animals on stage and in the wings and all that. It was quite a sight, and they told a much better story than this Blasphemy. And here's what I'll say. They obviously weren't trying to make an accurate retelling of the story. They seemed to think that the original story of Noah was boring, which is understandable if all you thought about the story of Noah was that it was children's book visuals. Like, if you just saw a bathtub boat and saw all the animals crammed in there, that seems like the extent that they went to be like, oh, we need to fix this, because they thought that that's what it was. Now, I don't think that people actually think that it looks like that with all the giraffes' heads sticking out of the roof and all that. But when you have that level of respect for it, then you're not going to treat it with the sacredness that it has for not only an account of the Bible, but also as a reflection of Jesus later down the line, as the one and only door that leads to life that the ark had. But also, I want to give it a little bit of credit. If you take it out of the perspective of the biblical narrative and adapting that, it kind of makes sense. And it's weird to say that, because it didn't make any sense. But that's because I was watching it as a Christian who knew the story of Noah. Noah's vision from God was not very specific. It was kind of just a lucid dream. Plus, God would not have wanted to save Noah, because the Noah portrayed in the movie was not a righteous man. He proved that humanity was wicked and must be destroyed, instead of God valuing the few that are righteous. So Noah was so convinced that God wanted him to save the animals. The animals were the innocent ones. And even he himself was an unrighteous man, or wicked man, or whatever he wants to put on it. And that is okay, because God didn't say anything to him. in the Bible, it says that God spoke to Noah and gave him specific instructions, and he walked with him. When it's so vague, when the vision is laid out as so vague, you can't help but have some miscommunication with Noah. And Noah probably did have an accurate view of himself being wicked and all that because he was just angry. That's usually what people will say about this Noah, is that he's just an angry man. He's not the righteous man that is written about in the Bible. And so therefore, yeah, it's understandable that God would want Noah to save the animals and then for him to let him and his family go extinct slowly over time with old age. That's understandable when you look at it within the confines of the movie itself, not because of the greater biblical narrative. Does that make sense? There's also, there's more than just the Genesis account of Noah. The big part that they missed, if they were just taking the Genesis account and adapting it, filling in the gaps, maybe you could squint your eyes and maybe see that they got away with it. They missed the entire other part of the scriptures that Noah shows up in, and that's Hebrews 11. In verse 7, it says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. That's key. That's the key part that they missed for this entire movie. There's three parts to it. By faith, Noah. Noah did not do it out of faith in the movie. He did it out of fear and did it out of guilt and did it out of necessity. There was no fear of God, no faith in God. When warned about things not yet seen, that's the closest we got, is that he was given a vision. But the whole story, the whole chapter of Hebrews 11 is talking about faith being hoping for something that's not yet seen. And then in holy fear, that goes back to by faith. In holy fear, he did not fear God in the movie. He built an ark to save his family. And it's obvious that he was trying to build the ark to save his family because it was for the sake of humanity and not for the sake of the animals in, reality, not in the movie. So they missed that key part that affects, the Genesis account and affects our perspective on Noah as we look at it after Jesus. I'm done. Go ahead.
Yeah, how it's just the whole Noah being not genocidal, well, basically genocidal, but also the whole Noah murder arc is just strange. I'm really trying to figure out because especially near the end when he's covered in blood after fighting Tubal Cain, and then he just goes up on the roof. He's like, okay, I'm gonna go murder my grandchildren, I guess. I'm that whole sequence is just so strange to me because I'm trying to exactly figure out what the inspiration for that was from the director's point of view and why they felt like that was such an important thing to include in the Noah narrative. And that's the thing that really gets me more about this film is that for me myself, it's kind of easier to just divorce myself from this isn't a Christian film. They're not totally going for that. If they were, they totally failed in that regard. But again, I think it's a really good way to try to understand what does the rest of society view Christianity and the Bible and stuff like that. And this is one way that you can see that is examining this media. And so that's why I'm really curious about the whole morality of the Noah film and what they're trying to go for. And especially with the whole point of Noah's Ark, and kind of it seems to be the whole point of the film is that Noah seems to become convinced that mankind is destructive, worthless, it needs to be wiped out, and so it's a good thing that God is wiping us out. We need to preserve that which is innocent and pure, which is the animals. And he's so committed, he believes that he's so committed to it that he's willing to murder his own grandchildren. And then at the end, you get this point where Emma Watson's character, I cannot remember her name. I'm not going to remember any of these characters' names. She goes well, it's basically you were given the choice and you chose mercy and love. And that's a good thing. And so it's such, I would say, such a modern morality that is being kind of shoved into this film. And it's just fascinating to me that they decide to go for yes, I will kill you now because you're not supposed to live. And also, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of other contrivances I really want to get into, what they kind of that's an interesting reference that they got right, or that's something that just came out of nowhere, and I'm curious why they put it there. But that's just the big thing where I think it really reveals this whole, I don't know, this strange viewpoint where they're just trying to say humanity is good because you chose to show mercy, and we have and yay, you let us live or whatever. And I think there's also some sort of environmentalist theme going on there a little bit. Which you can kind of discuss, but yeah, murder Noah is just it's just something that came out of left field for me.
You said, I think very unironically, you said Noah's Ark, but I believe you meant ARC, his story arc.
Yes.
But it's very funny.
Yes, his
Sorry,
arc.
I had to point that out. Okay. This got me down a different rabbit hole. And maybe this is our thing, you know how I preemptively said that you, Josh, and I should be the Nolan Bros, and then Zach got butthurt because I didn't think about including him way back when. Our thing should be blasphemous retelling of biblical stories in movies. Because I started going down a rabbit hole of other movies that were not well retold. And Exodus, God and Kings is a movie starring Christian Bale as Moses. I have not, and I wanted to watch it more than the Noah one because it's legitimately like, again, angry versions of these characters. Moses is now a warrior that is fighting against Ramesses. Like,
terrorist is the best way to put it, essentially.
well, I saw the Red Sea scene, and he throws his sword into the water, and that part's the sea. And then all the Israelites cross. They're like 3/4 through, and then they see, Pharaoh way back starting to enter the dry land of the sea. And instead of or most of them start pushing to get up on the shore. And then Moses he turns around, he takes his men and charges back towards Pharaoh to start fighting him. And then I don't even know what happened after that, but that's just, I'd be interested in seeing that one.
Well, it's Hollywood has to have a fight core.
Time.
You've got to have some action in this movie.
Yeah.
You got to have some action in this movie, spruce it up, which is, I think, another detriment to this film is that it really went on for an extremely long time. I was surprised that the main fight scene, because I've seen clips of Noah on YouTube, and I've seen the fight scenes before, so I was like, oh, okay, that must be near the end, when closer to the end before the flood comes. No, that's the halfway point of the film. So I think that they kind of went on just as from a purely story perspective, they kind of went on a too long of a they tried to make this film too long. It was 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. I think something like that. But that's again another detriment is that you're trying to adapt this, and again,
2 hours and 18 minutes.
Okay, again, you're trying to adapt this film, or you're trying to adapt this story, and there's inherent difficulties in adapting it to a film medium. But I think there's just some things that they didn't need to add, or ways that they were trying to go around it that just ultimately wasn't helpful. And especially the whole fighting battle scene, I don't really think that was necessary. That just was more extra added drama, which is I do want to talk about Tubal Cain though, and what they're trying to say about that though. But we can save that for a second.
Let's stick with some spiritual talk first, and then we can talk details about the movie. I saw an article when I was researching. I saw an article when I was researching the Noah film. And the headline was, "The Noah film is more accurate than most children's Bible stories." What do you think about that?
It depends on who's giving what child story you're being told.
Well, okay, the Noah story. The Noah story that generally is the bathtub ark with the animal sticking out, the thing that Answers in Genesis hates. But it's saying that there is more accuracy in how Noah is portrayed in this movie than in that children's story. And I somewhat agree. Obviously, not all aspects of this movie are accurate, but the dimensions of the ark were large, and it was a box. That's basically what the Bible, or what God told Noah to build, is a box. And it wasn't crammed. There was still space. Things like that I think I understand what, obviously, things like this article headline are trying to hook the reader to come read the article with something a little provocative. And it makes sense, but I also see the accuracy in that statement a little bit, but it's deceptive.
I don't know. It really just depends on what you mean by accuracy. I think that when people look at the Noah film, they're probably going to think they're probably fleshing it out more, so to speak. But the thing is, in the biblical narrative, we really don't learn too much about Noah. We know about he's considered righteous in God's eye. He's not perfect, because he does get drunk, and he does have that whole incident, which is one of the more interesting things that they decide to portray at the end of the film. But we don't really know too much about him. So whenever you're creating a story, you're going to flesh it out a little bit, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but it's interesting. And I think that there are some really interesting choices that were nice that they decide to add, but also just weird ones, just so many weird ones.
I think one of the only things this movie does is set up the reason why Noah was drunk. Like, we're not really given a reason in the Bible except that he overindulged, which is okay. It's not like we need a reason. But basically Noah was a degenerate after the ark landed because he went back on his conviction that he believed God told him to end all humanity and save the animals, and that's why he felt guilt for letting his grandchildren live. But that's why he was drunk, is that he was mourning his disobedience to a God that barely existed, at least in the confines of the film. But do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it was setting up the drunken scene, really, at the end.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to view this, is that instead of viewing this as a film as trying to portray a righteous man doing what a just but loving God has said and trying to preserve the goodness of humanity, so to speak, it's really just, I think it's better to view it as setting up for the drunken scene. It also really, from a certain perspective, this film explores better the relationship between Noah and Ham and why there is the whole curse of Ham, because that wasn't actually shown in the film itself, but in the biblical narrative, Noah gets drunk and some of his sons, like in the film, cover him up, and Ham doesn't, and there's not really an explanation given. And like Noah goes on this thing where he gives a blessing and cursing, and there's the curse of Ham. Yes, there should be the curse of Ham on him and his descendants. And again, it's one of those like stranger things that you kind of have to know a bit more context to understand in the Bible. But they from the film, you understand why Ham feels that way. But again, we don't know any of that in the biblical context, so it's just. Yeah, I would say that this movie does that as well, giving context to that post-flood thing, the post-flood story, and that's not the point. And we'll get to what I think the point is later when we talk about the final scene. The last meta thing before we talk details is another quote that Darren Aronofsky said while making it in production and marketing and all that. And this one, I don't know how I feel about it. He said,
because for me, when I was a kid and I read the original story, I didn't really sympathize with Noah. I was thinking about the people that didn't get on, because I was wondering if I would be good enough to get on the boat.
Right.
Again, a very modern perspective. And I think that's again, if we use this film as a way to understand how our society kind of thinks about biblical narratives, it's a simple fact that people are probably going to take a lot of issue with the fact of, why did God destroy most of humanity? And for us in the 21st century, that's a very hard thing to swallow, because we tend to, or we want to think that most humans, I don't think most humans would deserve to just be drowned out and died. And that seems unnecessary and genocidal. And why would you serve such a God like that, who's just totally cruel and that's unnecessary? Okay. Why didn't he just, do something else? But if we're following the biblical narrative, the point of the biblical account of Noah is that the world is so wicked and corrupt that God is literally grieving that he made humanity, that it's so terrible that it needs to be wiped out. And he's literally looking for some parts of humanity that he can preserve. And he finds that in Noah and his family. And that's the whole point of the flood narrative, is that he's literally sparing the righteous and wiping out all the unrighteous, and trying to set the world anew, as it were. Although the inherent corruptedness of humanity is still present, and it persists through Noah and through the next generations. So, but again, there's it's still challenging, and there's a whole scene in the flood where it's Noah hears them on the outside and he can't save them. And I think that's very challenging and hard for us in the modern audience, because we don't want to believe that. We don't want to believe that it would actually true and that God would actually wipe out all of humanity just because we were evil, or that we would deserve such a fate. And so that doesn't surprise me that he says that at all. And that doesn't really surprise me why the way that the film goes, I can understand that. And I was very intrigued how they're going to try and handle the whole humanity is evil and needs to be wiped out type of thing. And again, this is kind of where that whole environmentalist theme kind of went through, and I think it wasn't like super present, but like with the whole aesthetic of the film kind of had a post-apocalyptic look to it, and there's like kind of this idea that like, you know, nothing's growing, humanity has kind of destroyed the planet itself. And so I think you could kind of make the case that there's a subtext where in our modern 21st century, we kind of there is some people who view humanity as a disease that inherently destroys the earth, and that we're literally killing it. That now that's not everyone who is environmentalist or whatever. I'm not saying that, but there's a feeling that is present among some people and some ideologies that exists, and just generally people are thinking about like the climate and climate change and how humanity is causing our own doom. And I think that kind of plays out a little bit in the flood narrative. So I think you can make the case that there's a subtext going on here where there's the fears that, like, you know, in our 21st century, are we so wicked and depraved, and the only things we can think about is industrialization, consuming things and destroying the planet, that we're going to have our own flood, or in this case, a global catastrophe that's going to wipe out humanity? And are we worthy of persisting and deserving mercy and living on this planet? Or should we just let the animals who are pure and innocent and they don't actually destroy the planet, should they just be allowed to live and exist? I think there is some sort of subtext and theme that is going on here in this film that is being laid out, and that kind of explains some of the decisions that they make.
Yeah, the other interesting part is that they say that the animals are the innocent, but the animals were affected by the fall. The animals will still kill each other. The animals will still be affected by natural disasters and such, unless they believe that that doesn't happen. I don't understand. I don't know if the food chain just suddenly disappears because lions will lie down with the lamb when humans aren't around. That doesn't follow for me. The animals didn't sin, but we affected them, and with the fall, as Adam sinned, and then the entire world was affected by that, not just humans. So yeah, I don't know about the quote with him saying, I was wondering if I was good enough to get on the boat, because that implies that you can earn it, and that it was like an application, an application to get on the boat, when in actuality, it was a choice of the people. The people, he didn't necessarily invite people on. He did say that there was enough room for people, or was it the opposite? Was he saying that there's not enough room? It was when the flood was coming and his wife started saying, we could let them on. He's like, there's not enough room, or something like that.
I mean, from the way that I was kind of reading it, is that like Noah had the vision that like his family was specifically chosen, and he was specifically chosen to uphold a very difficult task of building the ark, and that they had to preserve.
Yeah, you're right.
The innocent, and so and the other thing that kind of was going on there is that there's the idea of like Tubal-Cain, who is mentioned in the Bible as a more industrial. He's like supposed to be like a worker of Smith. He's supposed to be like a metal worker or whatever. So that was an interesting thing there going on there. Noah was a descendant of Seth, and he was kind of considered like the last part of Seth. And then everyone else on Earth was a descendant of Cain and had the curse of Cain. And again, I think that's like where like the environmentalist theme was kind of going into it, because like there's like the cities of Cain, and like how they're like industrialized mega places, and that's what's killing the Earth itself, and how like they're trying to remake the world in their image, and they reject the creator, and they reject God, and they're just trying to make the world in their image, and that's not a good thing. And sort of, so I don't think Noah ever really like offered the ark to anyone in the film, which he did in the Bible. Like
in the movie,
it mentions how like, you know, there's at least like the offering given, but like no one accepted it, because they're like, well, why would I? You're just a fool. We don't need it. We're not going to be wiped out. I'm just going to continue to enjoy living in my evil ways, essentially.
So the ark was made for righteous people, and I don't think it actually says that Noah invited people on, but God says in Genesis 7:1, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. So if God were to have found other righteous people, he would have saved them. And this is kind of reason why I believe that it's proven that Noah's father had died before, because you could do the math with the genealogy. And then Methuselah actually died the year of the flood. But that's also something they got wrong in the movie, is that Methuselah died because of the flood, and he didn't experience the wrath because he was in Noah's genealogy. But you're right, or at least I was right. I don't know who's right.
We're all right. It's okay. Well, and then also like in the Noah story, like there's like the specific mention that God's hand is the one that shut the door of the ark. And I was really surprised that nothing like that really happened. I mean, it sort of happened with like the water and the flood sort of shutting the door on its own. I can't quite remember, but there's like nothing like as explicit as the biblical narrative where God shut the door. And that's a specific sign saying that God is the one who said, I'm preserving you. This is not on you. This is on me. You have done your part. You've because presumably he's been working on building this ark for a long time. People have known about this, but now it's time. And I am saying, you guys are righteous. I'm going to preserve you, and I'm going to flood the earth and hopefully, and I'm going to flood the earth and destroy all that is evil.
And Aronofsky's quote kind of more applies to the reflection of what the ark was supposed to point to, and that's Jesus being the only door, the only way into salvation, and him having control over that. And his quote saying, because I wondered if I was good enough to get on the boat, is again a mentality of earning, making your life one that would be acceptable. And yet, as we know from the Bible, we are all of our good deeds are dirty rags, or worse than dirty rags, technically, if you want to get into the actual translation of that word. But he still, even if the actual ark, either in biblical terms,
spoiler warning, no one's good enough to get onto the ark.
It's true. So that's where I'm torn, is because
it's the point. That's why I need Jesus. Wow.
That's why I'm torn, is because no one is good enough. And the reason Noah and his family were on there was because God was faithful and made a promise that he would continue with his promise to bring Jesus one day, and he needed a way to do that, and Noah's family was the way to do that. And yet you can't earn your way. I don't know. It just seems so backwards that I'm just going to move on from it and let Aronofsky deal with the big guy upstairs one day, even though I hate for that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I don't think I'm the person to convince him. Just saying. And I'm sure he's heard plenty of things in the past 10 years about how wrong he is. And he's heard what he needs to. If God wants him to hear the real story and to know that he was wrong in making the movie, then God will do that. Okay, let's talk about things they got right. One, you already mentioned, Tubal-Cain. He was a real person. He was a metal worker in Genesis 4:22. Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. That is basically the limit of his screen time in the Bible. But that's important because that's like the first mention of bronze and iron that we have in the Bible. These characters in the last half of Genesis 4 are actually very main characters in the Noah trilogy of books that I have. They're fleshed out and made into better characters, mostly from this passage. Lamech is Tubal-Cain's father, I believe, and Lamech is made to be a king. And his quote in 23 and 24 makes a lot more sense within those books. Like, that's something that they have Lamech say those words. And again, this only makes sense if you're looking at the passage with me, but it makes sense with the books, and they didn't take away from the Bible. They gave a possible story that was entertaining with it. Other things they got right. They got the basic form of the story. We got that. Like, it's Noah saving the animals on an ark.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna I mean, they have like the broad thing with like the dove and like getting like the fig tree, and they have like the general shape of the ark. The ark was more of a stranger design, in my opinion. It didn't look as sturdy as like I kind of thought it would have.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They got the basic story down. Like, they understood the dove, the animals, the Noah getting drunk, whatever. They didn't really understand the timing. Everything happened really fast. Like, the ark was built in 10 years or something because of the boys' age. I think in actuality, it took about 100 years. But it, again, within the story, within the within the movie, the confines of the movie, it makes sense because they had the rock monsters helping them. So, of course, it would take a shorter time. Ham was the black sheep of the family. We understood that, and they expounded on that. Noah has a line that says,
We broke the world. We did this. Man did this. Everything that was beautiful, everything that was good, we shattered.
That's pretty accurate, reflection about the fall. Here's one that I think not a lot of people realize, and they got right. No one mocked Noah day and night for building an ark. They got that right. Because, first off, obviously it doesn't happen in the movie. That's why it's on this list. But nowhere in the Noah account is there any line that says that people laughed at Noah or mocked him or said, or, teased him. I don't even know. You probably would hear the word teased in the kids' Bibles, kids' Sunday school. But it said that people were violent and evil, but it never said that people mocked Noah. And I think that's interesting that's like the Christmas story where we have Mary riding on a donkey and ending up in a wooden stable. Like, it probably ends up being a cave and she didn't actually have a donkey. Could be cultural. I don't know. It's things like that our culture is filled in, Christian culture is filled in the gaps, and it isn't in the Bible. So it's worth looking at. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, not really, not that one specifically, but I haven't exactly delved too deep into the Noah narrative recently.
Just saying. It's fun fact of the day. Seth's fun fact.
Okay.
Things I got, or did you have anything else I got right, or did I cover it all?
I'm honestly struggling to think of like any specific. I mean, there's like probably like tiny references here and there, but not really a lot that I can think of that they got really right. Or things I'm like, oh wow, that was pretty accurate, or at least like any major references.
Things I got wrong right at the beginning. The opening line. Do you remember what it was?
Something about like the cities of I think it was like something about like the curse of Cain, the curse of Cain, and they had a child Seth, and something cities of man, something world sad, last descendants of Seth, and something like that.
Okay, the intro was the story of Genesis 1, or at least a Cliff Notes version. I believe it was Noah's father telling him about the origins of the world. And he says, in the beginning, there was nothing. And that's obviously blasphemy right from the start. That's a great start to the movie to tell you what you're expecting. In the beginning of the Bible, 6 words are, or the beginning of the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God. So there, God was there. He's eternal. He's always been there. So starting off the movie with, in the beginning, there was nothing, kind of telling for the rest of the movie.
Well, I mean, just to briefly aside, but like in the theology of the movie, the creator is very absent, and I think that again reflects a view in our culture of a absent, quiet God who doesn't really answer prayer, who doesn't really speak, and it's more of like a like in a lot of like progressive Christian circles, it's more of like a God is like a feeling and understanding, a force for good, but he's not really a thing, like a thing. He's not really an entity. I think that's the more of a cultural consensus that's being reflected in this movie again, where it's like he works in mysterious ways and that's kind of it. And he does stuff, but he's not really as present. Where in the especially in like the early biblical narratives, he's much more present and active. You can see the hand of God a lot more.
Mm-hmm. I know there's a word for God being absent and people who believe that, but I can't find it. A couple other small things that they got wrong. Didn't get help from the rock monsters. Rock monsters aren't a thing. Actually, they are mainly, the Watchers are brought up in the Apocrypha, but some have argued that Daniel 4 includes a reference to them, talking about a messenger from heaven. I won't go into theology of Daniel because it can get pretty crazy. But there might be value in the Watchers existing, not necessarily looking like rock monsters. They aren't pivotal to any Bible story, and so it doesn't really matter, even though it doesn't make sense. Like, why are they included? Why do they have to be rock monsters? Why do you have to include Watchers in a movie that's already super epic? whatever. There is the Zohar. The Zohar is the magic rock that's like an infinity stone that can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I was like
That was
wondering what
pretty
that
fun.
was. I was like, what is that supposed to be? I can.
It's not supposed to be anything. Methuselah didn't have powers. Like he touches his adopted granddaughter and makes her able to be pregnant.
Yeah. Well, okay. What was the whole deal with that? I was like, okay, this is like Anthony Hop. Like somebody just like put Anthony Hopkins on set and said, "Go wild," because he was just like, okay, he can put people to sleep. He can make barren women somehow be able to have children. I think like the insinuation was like he is somehow more connected with the will of the creator, and he can maybe be calling upon him a little bit. But it's just like weird. Like okay, and then like I don't even know, like he's just hiding out somewhere in a giant cave and just doesn't do anything for like forever, and he has a sword that can just shoot fire, and I don't know. It's just I don't know.
He has a plant that can grow an entire forest.
And I think that was like supposed to be more of a creator thing, and specifically like the creator caused that.
Sure, but he has access to it. Also, having the Ark take 100 to 120 years to build makes more sense with the tree thing. They had to create the little magic sapling that just made a forest around them. When in actuality, when you have the Ark being made for 120 years, those trees grow back full and strong after many, many years. And so then they just keep harvesting the same trees. Answers in Genesis does an amazing job with both the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter describing what that time could have looked like and what it could have been like building the Ark and actually doing it with your own two hands with 8 people. And it's a great experience to go. Other things I got wrong. Ham and Japheth had wives.
Yeah, okay. Where were the wives? I was thinking about the entire film. Where are the wives? Like that's like one of I don't know how you could miss that. And like they made and when Ham went to like go get the brides and like he got the one. Okay, well, because like when Ham went to go get the bride, or when Ham went alone, he's like, I'm gonna go be in front of the people because I don't like my dad or whatever, parental issues. Okay, whatever. And then he's stuck in like the hole with that one lady. Like, okay, you know that's how they're gonna introduce this. Like they're gonna have her be like she's gonna be brought in with him, I guess, and maybe he'll grab another woman and that'll be Japheth's right or something. I don't know. But then they just like kill her. I'm like, where is this coming from? And I guess like Noah's just like, oh, well, okay, sorry, you're gonna die, and she just like it gets like literally like stampeded. I don't know. Just that was just I'm really trying to figure out what they were going for with that.
And Noah and his sons, and his wife and his sons' wives. At the very least, I think it's assumed that all 3 of them had wives, especially because it took so long to make the Ark that they would have married. But at the very least, there were 2 wives because there's plural. And it's only logical to assume that all 3 of them had wives. So that's inaccurate. And again, they changed it so that they could fit the narrative that Moses or that Noah was okay with Shem having a wife because she was barren. Like that's why he liked her, is because she couldn't have kids, and he knew that his goal was to make humans extinct. So he was okay with them, you know, having fun as a married couple because they weren't going to produce any more offspring. And then when Methuselah healed her, when he's like, help me pick berries. You're pregnant. No, not that. You can be pregnant. Noah got very mad at him because he now has to deal with the possibility of grandchildren.
Okay, and I'm sorry, but I just want to say here, I can tell that this is such a modern Hollywood movie when, suddenly, for no reason, even though I should be doing something else, I just feel really horny all of a reason. Just want to start making out with you, I guess. And they're just pulling out the shirt like, you're trying to look for your brother. What's going on in here? Why are we doing this now? All of a sudden. Oh my goodness. It's just...
Yeah.
Hey, you got to have your little smut, you know, in your little movies, your little smut, your little fight scenes, your little action, your little personal drama, your morally complicated figures, and there you go. Modern movie.
You know it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It obviously lacked the message of the saving power of the Ark. Noah says at one point there's no room for them, but that could have immediately been followed with they made their choice. Wouldn't that have kind of made it more accurate? Like they made their choice to not be righteous. And that is a choice, at least back before Christ is choosing to follow the way of the creator, or however they would have phrased it in the movie. But something like that could have twisted it to make it a little bit more meaningful and biblical.
Yeah. And then the other thing too is like the whole issue, not issue, the whole like dynamic with Tubal Cain and the people. That was, again, it's very interesting because like you brought up the quote where he's kind of there's the big question, like, you know, oh, God's so mean for wiping out most of humanity. And there's this weird thing in the film where it's kind of like trying to portray these people as good and like, oh, it's kind of sad that they're dying. But at the same time, it also doesn't. And there's that toss. And like, again, in the Bible, it talks about how, like, you know, there's the mention that like everyone was evil and all their thoughts are continually about how to do more evil. And so the picture that's presented in the biblical narrative is not one of like good people or really innocents. It's just evil people who are doing evil things because they want to. And the whole like I think like they pretty much added the whole sequence of Tubal Cain just to add drama and for a fight scene because like you want those, okay? And I distinctly remember in 2014, way back when, like vaguely seeing some of the trailers for the Noah film, and like that was the thing that they kind of showed in all the trailers is like the people running in the rain and the fight scene and blah 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 blah. Because you got to have that again. You're expecting that in modern films and stuff to have some action, which I think is again one of the difficulties for trying to keep it interesting. But there's just such a weird thing going on there where like they're trying to portray the humanity in the film as like, again, like evil industrialists sort of like, and they're just kind of like post-apocalyptic now. But at the same time, like, you know, oh, maybe we can save them, but nope, I guess not. And we're just going to wipe out all of humanity. And so there's this weird thing going on there. And actually just kind of on the post-apocalyptic thing, I was kind of surprised that they decided to go for that, because if you look kind of at the beginning of the film, like it shows the continent of Pangea, and that goes into it. That's probably a bit drawn of inspiration from maybe the young Earth creationist type of view, where young Earth creationists tend to essentially believe that like Pangea existed, and then it was broken up into the modern continents after the flood. When you take a literal viewpoint of the flood narrative,
or during the flood,
but then like. And the thing that they kind of portray is that like humanity was advanced. Like there's examples of like some like oil drills and like mechanical engineering and something of like almost like modern day. But that's destroyed now. That's gone, and people are just scrounging in the ruins trying to survive. And I'm actually not immediately opposed to that. I think it's an interesting thing to try and go on the narrative of like, you know, Cain, who is in the Bible talked about kind of being like one of like the first city builders who built like a city in like in the urban centers. I think it's interesting to try and go in that route and try to portray a pre-flood world and just kind of a little crazy. Like, I mean, I'm not necessarily unopposed to that. I think it's an interesting thing you can do and try to describe how the world might have looked before the flood, because we really don't know. But I don't know, that just like the whole thing with the people is just very interesting how they went about it, especially because like, okay, guys, we're just camping out here the entire time and not attacking until it's literally raining. Well, okay.
Yep. Timing was very weird. On that note, did the men, they just kind of were the men, Tubal Cain's men, did they have corrugated sheet metal at one point? I think I saw them running with corrugated sheet metal for shields, and I'm like,
yeah, they did. Okay, and again, that's like the whole like post-apocalyptic thing. I mean, okay, hypothetically speaking, it's not impossible that there was some advanced technology. Like, you know, maybe people were just like, maybe like God said, hey, by the way, here's how you build a steam engine to Adam and Eve, and then they just transmitted that to their kids and they were able to do that. Like, I'm not saying it's technically impossible that they could have had some advanced technology in the pre-flood world. I don't know. Maybe so. Maybe if you have a lot of time on your hands and like it's, who knows? But yeah, that's like it seemed to be the whole thing that they're going for. It's like we're in the ruins of civilization and we're trying to get onto this ark to survive. And again, that's going with the whole environmentalist type of aesthetic where it's like, we've ruined this planet because of our industrialization, and now we're kind of paying the cost for that. Quite literally, going to be wiped out, and we're trying to struggle to survive and that sort of stuff. And I think that again goes into I think that's part of the reason they chose to use a post-apocalyptic type of setting, because it's the idea of like, what about in the modern day and our modern industrialization, and like, are we going to kill the planet and suffer for that? I think that's going on there as well. Mm-hmm. Also, they had firepower. They're just and the magic shiny rocks. I
think your point is that they were post-humanity, and that's with the post-apocalyptic is usually that goes hand in hand with post-humanity, and that's the feeling they wanted to give the men, the Tubal Cain's men. Something that, again, some of these quotes are just interesting to dissect on their own. Tubal Cain at one point said,
I am a man made in your image. Why will you not converse with me?
That's very, feels like he deserves it.
Demanding. He feels like it's owed to him. Like he knows that he's made in God's image, and so he thinks that he should be able to talk with him, when in reality it's a relationship thing. And again, not expecting that from this movie, but that's an interesting perspective that makes him so evil, I guess. Well, there's this interesting thing around Tubal Cain's character, where if you look at the Noah film on its own, and like, let's just ignore the biblical context, Tubal Cain kind of comes off as more sympathetic and almost maybe right in some sort of sense, because like, it's like he asks for help, and like he's getting nothing from the creator, and he's kind of, ultimately he's a bit more selfish, but he's kind of like, there's like a certain point that he's got that is kind of correct, where it's like, you rejected us, and so we're going to live on our own and survive on our own, and we don't need you. But there's also a bit of bitterness and envy, and he kind of wants to have that connection, and it's just kind of weird. But again, I think if you look at I think that's more of an example of how how this modern society that we live in views these old stories and views the things in the past, and how I think that's more a reflection of how people in the 21st century in a post-Christian, major Christian religion society, we kind of feel abandoned and rejected by God, or at least that we don't even feel like he exists, and he isn't real, he doesn't answer prayer. And so why not just build things in your own image? Why not just, that becomes Tubal Cain's whole thing, is that he wants to survive against God. He essentially has like a hatred for him. Mm-hmm. Even though he's not necessarily an atheist, but he essentially has a rejection of God. He chooses to reject that, but he still wants to survive and essentially contaminate the next world in his own image. That's literally what he says. And I think they're trying to go for something interesting. I think they're trying to go for something there, but it's just kind of interesting because, again, in the biblical context, it's the idea that everyone is evil and everyone is deserving of the flood, but God chooses to preserve and save some humanity because he is loving, because he finds them righteous. But because he is just, he has to do what is just, and that's remove what is wicked and evil.
Get into the more about Noah's perspective, because I have a whole paragraph written here. Noah's perspective is that humanity must be completely wiped out and that they exist only to help the animals survive. It paints God to be only what is said in Genesis 6:6, when it says, the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth and his heart was deeply troubled. That's it. That's just that verse. And that there's no hope after that. There's no hope, no redemption, no love. It's not the same God that is described 3 verses later in Genesis 6:9, where it says Noah walked with God and had a relationship with him. It's just the God regretted that he made humans on the earth. And it's an attack on who God is. Noah said, I failed after choosing not to kill Elah's twin girls. So he thinks that God's mission for Noah is to end all humanity and to bring animals to safety. Not that the God in the movie was specific or anything, because he was kind of vague with his visions. God is just and can't stand the wickedness of man, but he's gracious. They miss that part of our God, that he's gracious and there is a way out. For the people of Noah's time, it was the ark. There was the option to be righteous and be allowed on the ark. In our time, there's nothing that we can do to earn our way to heaven and make ourselves right with God. It is only through Jesus that we do that. And yes, God will judge us if we do not repent, but it is his grace that made a way through Jesus and gave us the option to lay down our life for him to accept us into heaven and back into relationship with him. It's not about heaven even. It's people say, oh, just be accepted. Just do this so you'll be accepted into heaven one day. And it's like, no, it's about a relationship with God here on earth and for eternity. And they just miss that part of God. They miss the grace part. And again, maybe I'm expecting too much out of them, but that's something that I can't stand for when critiquing this movie. Noah in this movie was doing exactly what Romans 1:25 said humanity in their sin does. In Romans 1:25 it says, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. The created things are the animals, and the Romans reflecting on the sin of the people as the sin that we naturally tend toward. That's exactly what Noah did. And we already talked about how he's basically no better than any of the other humans. And that's technically makes sense in the movie because he expects to die off and not leave any humans left. So I don't know. It's just so anti-biblical and it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Which again, it's a very good way for viewing how our society views things, life, reality, and is exploring that through reinterpretations of the biblical narratives. So yeah, it's just the Noah film is very interesting to me on many levels. There's some things where I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way to do this. There's also a lot of things where I'm like, that's just wrong and you're missing this. And it's the whole thing with Noah and the wanting to wipe out humanity after like trying to get some wives for his sons, then say, nope, we're screwed. Humanity's evil. We just need to wipe ourselves out. You know, the true first anti-human, you know, and just that whole thing is just wrong, but also just so fascinating, I think, to me. And the ending part is that like, oh, maybe I was right in sparing, and like there's like this insinuation that like he was given that the choice of humanity continuing on was not God's choice. It was ultimately Noah's choice, which is again kind of strange, but he is the one who says, okay, I'm not going to wipe them out. I think there's still, I love them. And I think there still might be something worthwhile in preserving the humanity. And I think that's kind of what, maybe that's saying something about how our culture is trying to say that about ourselves, that maybe we still think that love is the most important thing, and that we should be able to carry on because of that, and something like that. Which again, like the whole point of the story of Noah is that God is wiping out the wicked, but he's preserving the righteous, and that is still offered to this day, because there's going to be the final judgment. The flood is the first judgment of sorts, the first global judgment, and that's the whole point of the rainbow, which they have one final thing. They have like a weird thing with the rainbow in the end where it's more of a circle that expands, and a little strange, but whatever. The whole point of the rainbow is the promise that God is not going to flood the earth, but he is going to bring about a final judgment one day. And that's where the whole point of Christianity and the cross and accepting Christ as your savior comes into.
The rainbow at the end was more of a sign of Noah learning his lesson. And while the biblical rainbow is about Noah's faithfulness throughout the story and his sacrifice that he gives, like the actual sacrifice of the animals to God, and therefore God making a promise never to flood the earth again. Also, there's a lot of fun stuff in the Noah book. I brought it up multiple times, but one of the things it brings up is it doesn't say, or one of the things it brings up is that rainbows existed before the flood. They just became meaningful because of God's promise. And again, the basis of that is because God probably didn't change the molecular structure of photons flying through, water particles after the flood. It just meant something afterwards. Again, another Seth fun fact. The two lines that again show more about Noah's beliefs was when he cut the rope to Elah and Shem's raft, and Shem yells at him,
I thought you were good, so that's why he chose you.
He chose me because he knew I would complete the task. Nothing more, son.
And that just shows Noah's perspective, is that the task is to eliminate humanity. Because again, Genesis 6:6, the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So that's the only thing that they adapted, is that humans are bad. And that it was a mistake that we're still here after the flood. The other thing is that Elah at the very end, when Noah is, after his whole drunk escapade, Elah says to him,
he asked you to decide if we were worth saving.
And again, it's putting Noah at this the standard of being God, making these decisions for humanity. And maybe that's Aronofsky's point is that we have the power to decide that, and that I don't know. It's such a confusing movie.
Again, I think it's the whole. We have to try to imagine this through a non-Christian 21st century modern secular perspective, and Noah becomes the stand-in for all of humanity. Again, a bit of the industrialist, environmentalist theme kind of coming through there, and I think that the idea is that like Noah is questioning: should we just wipe ourselves out? Should we just die, and will the earth become a better place? And he doesn't necessarily like that idea, but he feels like he should do that. But he ultimately doesn't. He says, I saw love. I couldn't do it. I showed mercy, and I feel terrible, but I couldn't do that. And Ela says, that's a good thing, actually. You were given the choice, and you chose to show mercy. And I think if you take that from a 21st century modern secular perspective, the idea might be something along the lines of like, should we show mercy to ourselves now? Like, does humanity have any worth in a world where we're kind of causing climate change and destroying the environment, and maybe we're just a plague and we should just wipe ourselves out? There's some people who argue that. And the point of this film is to use the Noah narrative to say there's still something worthwhile in us. We can preserve and live on, and we should have humanity has worth still, and we should still persist on this earth. That's not what the Bible is about at all. But I think this is a good way to see that how the Bible is being used and biblical stories are being used to for modern people to understand modern problems. Although I'd say to the detriment of the biblical story, and you could use different mediums to explore that. But nonetheless, I think that's kind of what's going on here. This is kind of making me interested in other pre-flood type of stories that are being told. And I don't know, for some reason, I feel like there's so much potential you could do with a pre-flood story or a pre-flood world and what the world would look like. And there's actually a book I've read before, which is kind of about that. It's more of it's inspired by Tolkien, but it's kind of like a grand narrative that tells the story of like the war in heaven and the pre-flood world and all that goes on, which I think there's like a lot of interesting medium and ways you could explore the Noah narrative. And ultimately it's just fascinating to me that this movie was such a big movie. It's so expensive to make, so many big actors into it, that I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't do well in regards to actually being a good faithful adaptation compared to like The Chosen, compared to The Chosen, which I think
this. I believe in you.
Yeah, which is I think like The Chosen, for example, is a better example of how to adapt a story, even though again that's not perfect, but nothing is, and you can only get so far. But yeah, it's from a Christian perspective, it's pretty bad, but even still, I think you can really dig into it and explore it, and it can give you some information about the society and the culture and the state that we live in, and how people are using these old stories to understand reality as it is right now. So it can give you a clue into the non-Christian world a bit, which does have some use, but it's just also just kind of weird. Not a really good Noah story, I'd say, but a fascinating film. Seth, if you're ever like worried about a flood and need a boat, I know a guy.
No, please don't. Oh.
Okay, I feel like I'm obligated to say that joke, like because it is a Noah film. So
Sure. You're bringing up a pre-flood world again. I would recommend the Remnant trilogy about Noah. I think Answers to Genesis did a great job with it. And if anyone who knows me personally is interested, I'm happy to offer you the books for a little bit. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the one. So we're always trying to get meaning out of these movies, and we're trying to find the message. And it's been pretty obvious, it's environmental, humans are bad, all that. But I think it really pushed home when it flashed forward outside of the biblical narrative, or unbiblical narrative, I would say, to that war scene. Do you remember the war scene? Because it had the silhouette of Cain early on, and then it did this. It was a cool effect of war throughout the generations, and it had this silhouettes of Roman soldiers in Civil War to World War II and to modern war and all that stuff. It was an interesting visual. But did you have any thoughts about that? And how, I don't even remember what was being said at that point.
that was the one. I think that was Noah telling the story of creation, which that does remind me. The one last thing about the story of creation, there's like this interesting blend when Noah tells a story where it's I think it's a combination of like taking the biblical account literally, but also trying to apply like an evolutionary perspective to it. And I'll just kind of briefly say that again, Seth and I were raised and are both like young Earth creationists. You don't have to be a Christian to be a young Earth creationist. Okay, let's just make that clear. But a lot of Christians do take these accounts more literally, and so they consider themselves to be young Earth creationists. They don't believe that Earth. We don't believe that Earth is millions of years old. There are what's it called? Theistic evolutionists. No, there are people called evolutionary theists who are Christians but believe in evolution or believe in like Darwinism. And again, that doesn't whether you believe in Darwinism or not doesn't make you a Christian or not. But there is definitely a big debate between Christians about like, how should we interpret scripture and stuff like that. And in the account of Noah where he talks about the creation of the world, it's a very evolutionary portrayal, but just sped up, because like you see like the rocks slamming into the earth, and then it slowly forms into the moon, and then like you see the earth cools, and then that becomes the planet itself. Then you see like the creeping, crawling things. Then it moves along and it becomes something more advanced. And so that's a very interesting way of like kind of trying to combine evolution with the biblical account. And then just also like the whole thing that you're talking about, the whole silhouette thing. I think that's, again, it's a modern way of trying to understand modern realities through the biblical narrative. And that's the idea of like the curse of Cain, and the fact that like, Cain killed his brother Abel. And since then, humanity has been at war. Yeah, you can show it right there. And it's the idea like, the curse of Cain has been with us throughout all of time. I think I don't really have any negative opinions towards it personally. I think it's more just trying to say, oh, look, we've always been killing each other. Woe is man type of an idea, which is true. Like, ever since like Cain killed Abel, we have been killing each other and doing terrible things towards each other. And that has not changed from the first stone, supposedly. That has not changed with like the first killing blow to the most recent killing blow. From whether you're fighting with swords and clubs or spears or stones, to axes, to arrows, to trebuchets, to gas, to firearms. It's that has been present in humanity. So I don't know, I think it's like an interesting creative choice. I don't necessarily have any negative thoughts towards it, because they're not trying to say anything really besides that, I don't think. But yeah.
So it's accurate in saying that humans are depraved and evil and naturally bent towards wickedness. But again, I go back to, I think, my main point for this episode as we look at this movie is that there's no hope. There's no redemption. There's no love that's shown as an option. It's just humans are bad. And that's not the story of the gospel. It's the opposite. It's saying that, yes, we are depraved. There's nothing we can do for salvation. There's nothing we can do to earn salvation ourselves, but there is hope, there is redemption, and there is love through Jesus. And there was hope, love, and redemption through God providing the ark through Noah for the people who could have been righteous if they chose, but they chose evil, and they chose the natural desire of their heart first. And I think that part of the story with the silhouettes and stuff, again, a cool scene visually. I actually think that's accurate. They just forgot the second part, the actual hope, the actual solution to the problem. And that sums up the entire movie, I would say, right there. And that's why I ended it right there.
Yeah, it's a very modern, cynical viewpoint, which is the world that we live in a post-World War II world where we see the horrors of humanity, and we don't have there isn't the mass belief in a God that offers salvation as was present in previous generations. And so there's a lot of cynicism nowadays, and people that viewpoint that is being expressed by Noah is so common to hear nowadays for me that I'm not surprised that it is in there at all. But again, the whole point of the gospel is that, yes, the whole point of the gospel is that there is what Noah is saying, and so it's yes, humanity is depraved, and God is still loving and merciful, and he offers salvation through the blood of Jesus Christ, who died for your sins on a cross, so that he could take the penalty for that, and so that you could, by putting your faith and accepting accepting him as your Lord and Savior, you can be offered redemption and forgiveness from your sins, and then be brought into the fold in the family of God, and preserved from the coming judgment and wrath of God that is going to be poured out upon the rest of humanity and the entire world. Yeah, that is the story of the Bible and the story of Christianity, and that is what is missing from this.
Which is the whole point, and should have been the point from the start. Yeah, again, I would encourage, if you want a good retelling of the story with some fiction thrown in there, Sight and Sound has a great show. The Ark Encounter has so much content surrounding it, and I think that they do it way better. And maybe next time, don't have an atheist write your story about the Bible. Just throwing that out there. Well, thank you, Will, for joining me, talking with me for a very long time. I appreciate it. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. And again, it's a little bit of an odd movie because we usually cover popular movies. I want to do some more lesser-known movies, and I think this one was a good one, and maybe the start of a new series of blasphemous movies that we can review.
Yeah, there's a lot of these. There's a lot of them that I think would be interesting. Some that are well-known, some that are less, but I think they all are very interesting to dissect and investigate. How does the world view the Bible, and how do they reinterpret biblical stories to suit their own narratives, their own agendas, and for their own purposes? And so, yeah, I'm excited to do more. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, take care and God bless.
Cool. Take care and God bless. Follow our Instagram and share this podcast with your friends. Until next week, know that you're loved. God bless. Will already said his outro.